Hello, my name is Richard Boly, and I am a career U.S. diplomat. I have been for the better part of the last 20 years, but I'm also a closet wannabe geek. When you think of diplomats, if you haven't met one in the flesh, you might have to rely on stereotypes. And all stereotypes have a grain of truth in them. The truth about diplomats is we tend to be risk-averse and we don't like change. The way diplomats for centuries communicated with each other was through wax-sealed diplomatic notes. And while diplomats continued to communicate with wax-sealed diplomatic notes, the rest of the world discovered a disruptive technology of the day called the telegraph. So while diplomats were communicating at the speed of wax-sealed diplomatic notes, conflicts were moving at the speed of electrons. The result was not pretty. So that was a long time ago, more than a century ago. A lot's happened. We've learned, we've changed, right? Well, let's think. We'll move into, say, a decade or two ago, when you, or maybe even your parents, were geeking out over your brand new Bondi blue iMac. We at the State Department were keeping Wang computers on life support. They were in Chapter 11, and we kept them going for another 3 years. So we thought, how can we address this? Technology is too important, and diplomacy isn't too important to leave just to this slow evolution. So my Office of E-Diplomacy joined with a bunch of retired distinguished ambassadors at the American Academy of Diplomacy and the Robertson Foundation for Government to vision this 24-hour gathering of Silicon Valley tech entrepreneurs, a dozen successful tech entrepreneurs, a dozen successful ambassadors, a dozen newly minted diplomats, and a dozen graduate students to help think about how we could do this. Now, strange bedfellows sometimes come together and gel well, but in 24 hours we had to think, how can we get these people who have wildly different worldviews to come together and think about something not just from their perspective. And our big concern was these sometimes strong-willed and even big-egoed former ambassadors would want to look at things from a policy perspective. And so to keep them from getting wrapped around the axle about talking about policy today, we went back to the future. What we decided to do was take recent historical events that had a diplomatic component and think about how they might have been different if we pulled today's technology back to the past. So we took 4 case studies, including the people power revolution in the Philippines. Some of you might remember the discovery of Imelda Marcos's shoes. There was more to it than just that. We had some very creative approaches to thinking about that. Also looking at the 2004 the Indian Ocean tsunami. That was probably the last major world catastrophe that happened pre-Twitter. So thinking about how that was handled versus how we can handle with today. The Ottawa Treaty on International Campaign and to ban landmines, that was a real black eye for the Clinton administration, largely because they were caught off guard and they weren't able to react quickly. And we all know the world's slow and often missing reaction to the Rwandan genocide. Now, these are all things that have relevance today and that we could learn from by taking those case studies and spending some time working on it. Over the course of those 24 hours, what we found is that these very different people were able to understand the perspective of the other and what technology could bring to diplomacy and what diplomacy could benefit from by wrapping it around technology. These folks worked with startup zeal way late into the night to develop thinking about how today's technologies could have made a difference in the past, and then translating that to these analog ambassadors. Now, the outcomes weren't revolutionary, but they were really important because what they did is these retired ambassadors are kind of like the ghost whisperers to leadership. And we turned them from thinking technology's something that they should be skeptical of to being something positive. But some things never changed. When it came time for the photos, the ambassadors stood in the front, and they wanted to say, you know, we know this technology is important, but we're in the front row. So where do we go from now? Well, we recently had a conversation with the Foreign Office of the UK, and they were entranced by this idea. So the sequel to Visioning Tech Diplomacy may next come with a British accent. Now, I had to leave work early today, and the only way my boss will know that I was actually here is if one or more of you go to that rate him at the bit.ly/ignite Boly and give me a shout out. Thank you.